Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kate Kite. I'm the Continuing Education Coordinator for Illinois Heartland Library System. You will see on your screen that we do have some housekeeping today, so please mute yourself unless asked to unmute by IHLS or the speakers. Please turn off your video. You can use the chat box or the Q&A to ask questions. And then you must rename yourself either your first name, last name, or your first name or library name to ensure we can count your attendance and to know who you are. So we do have the 30 dots in the Zoom box with your name, then you can choose to rename. We do have staff here who can help with that. So if you do not have your name as your first and last name or your first name in your library, you will hear from library or IHLS staff to change that, or you might get bumped into the waiting room until that's resolved. But we know that everybody knows how to rename themselves or will learn today. So we're so glad that you're here. And I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I'm very excited to have our presenters here today. We have Patty Collins and Gail Santy, both with the Central Kansas Library System. I missed the first time that they did this presentation for us, which was back in the heyday of COVID. But I did get to meet them in person and see a presentation they did at the Association of Small and Rural Libraries Conference. And it was so enjoyable and they are fantastic. And so I'm going to turn it over to Gail and Patty, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Hello, Illinois librarians. We are so pleased to be with you today for Library Ethics 101. This is what we call part 2 because some of your libraries have seen this before, but we will provide some new scenarios for you today. Keep in mind, we understand that some of the conversations that we need to have are sometimes things that you need to keep confidential. So if you have one of those scenarios or situations you'd like to speak about, feel free to direct message me or John in the chat, and those will be read for you so you don't have to out yourself. So I'm going to start by sharing our screen.
This is Gail, and I'm going to say that this presentation is geared towards frontline staff. We might not have very many frontline staff watching live, but library directors instead. And library directors, this is something then that you could use in part or in full, however it's going to work for you, to sit down and go through the scenarios with your frontline staff. And there's often not a lot of training for them, but this is a good one for them.
We're not going to spend a lot of time telling you who we are. We'll leave that on the slides for you to see. But actually, this is really who we are. We are very compassionate library workers. We believe in whole person consulting. So you'll see a little of our passion will come through today. But we do love our library work and we're excited to share with you. So the format of today's presentation will come to you mostly in scenarios. I'll share a scenario. Gail and I will pipe in, but then we're going to share some of the learning in between some of these slides. So this one is a fairly common one. Staff are uncomfortable whenever a regular patron continually stares at them. What do you do?
Well, Patty, I don't know if I wasn't paying attention or I didn't hear it, but type your answers into chat or unmute yourself and start talking. This is a very interactive session. And sadly, for most of these, there isn't a right or a wrong answer. Okay, so we are uncomfortable whenever a regular patron continually stares at them. What would you do, Patty?
Well, I've had this opportunity, as I know many of our folks in our room have. Sometimes I'll go up and ask the person if there's something that I can do to help them, or because sometimes they're just afraid to approach someone. Sometimes it is that creepy stalker feel. And if it comes to me as a supervisor, I'm going to help the staff member answer the question by I might go up and speak for the person and saying that, is there something that we can do to help you? Or do you have questions that we can help answer for you? Sometimes they don't mean to be, and they're completely not unaware that this is how they look, but also they're actually just waiting for their turn on the computer or waiting for the desk to be quiet. And sometimes that's how quickly we discover that that's really what they need to know.
And I would say that it's more and more common for there to be some sort of electronic sign behind the circulation desk that may be, showing the news on silent, or it may be showing upcoming programs or community events and things like that. And maybe that's what the patron is looking at. Maybe they're looking in your direction, but they're not looking exactly at the staff member. There could be other reasons for this. What you're going to find as we work through these is, in order to give an answer, we have to ask a lot of questions. And Patty said the first thing is you're going to go over and you're going to talk to them. Maybe the patron was trying to make deliberate eye contact to get someone's attention. Maybe they were looking at the programs upcoming. Maybe they were looking at the painting that happens to be on the wall in that general direction. Maybe they are taking a special medication that makes them look like they're staring, but they're not really. They're just kind of dazed. Or maybe they're under some sort of chemical influence that they aren't even aware that they're in the building. Lots of questions to be asked with every scenario. Ethics is never a clear-cut, black or white, right or wrong.
And what's really important about these ethical situations is you're going to find sometimes that you're coming from the right place, from your heart. And so sometimes you have to take that step away and think, okay, I'm a library professional. And what would the library professional, not Patty, the person with the great big heart, handle the situation? And so Gail has alluded, every question that we ask today or every scenario we bring is going to have 30 different answers.
Well, maybe not 30. We've only got an hour.
But it always comes back to policy. This is
Okay.
the meat of your library work, because it defines all of the things that you do. And it doesn't necessarily define how you're doing. That's what procedure does. But this is where your patron use or library use behavior policy comes into play, because if it is a situation that is more than I'm just looking at the painting behind you, then this is when we have to decide what action we'll take and how we'll take that action.
And who will take it as well? Right. Your state, I am sure, has a list of most recommended policies. Make sure that you work with your people to get those policies in place. But a policy sitting in a book is worthless. The policies need to be drilled down all the way to staff members, and there may need to be some interpretation on your part to help them understand, okay, this is exactly what the policy says, this is how we interpret it, and this is how we put it into action. One of the things that we always talk about when we're in person is we slam our hand down loud and obnoxious, and we say, it's policy. Well, that's the last thing you want to do when you're working with a patron or even with another staff member. Policy is black and white, but the whole area in between is gray. And so that's why then an interpretation that is standardized is really important on policy, because we do have a lot of black and white, very logical thinkers in library work. And my definition of the gray area can be different than yours or on down the board.
And one of the things to think about is, Gail used the scenario about slamming your hand down saying it's policy. It's important that you know your policy before you accidentally slip into that situation and say it, because somebody's going to come to you sometime and say, okay, prove it.
It's a
And
piece of paper, not a weapon. Don't weaponize it.
so the policies are what we need to do, but the procedures give you some freedom of how that policy will be followed or enforced.
In
And
Kansas, policies have to be approved by the library board. Now, as library workers, we know that often the best policies is not the board working in isolation. It is the board working with the director and then the director with the staff. Oftentimes we have policies on the books, but we haven't done it that way in years. That's a great opportunity to get staff involved and say, okay, how do we do this? Hopefully everyone is doing it the same way. And then that can go back to the board and say, this is really out of date. Here's how it is now. And we need that policy to be rewritten. Policies they are broad, they are widespread. You never write a policy for a one-off instance. You never write a policy for someone who uses the ramp as a skateboard, because you know what? That skateboarder is no longer a child. It is now a 35-year-old taxpayer. Policies are never one and done, and they do not live forever. They need to change to reflect what's going on in your library now. They answer major operational issues. Procedures, on the other hand, have a close, tight focus. They also can be continually improved and changed. And they're a statement of how, when, and or who, and sometimes what. They detail the process. How do we get from A to Z? Our board may say, okay, we're charging 10 cents a day overdue fines or whatever it is. The policy does not say it needs to be one dime. Procedure is what allows us to give change back on $1 or to allow a school-age kid to dust shelves to work off the fine, or allow us to have a cans for fines drive, or a library amnesty fines week. Procedure is what does that. The important part about procedure is that everybody should be doing it the same way. That way you're never going to have a patron come back that says, oh, but Patty said I could do this, or Gail said I could do that. It allows everyone to work on the same playing field, and it really helps give clear guidelines to our staff members.
Procedures have more buy-in if the staff are allowed to help write them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that seems to be the biggest hint there, is allowing the person who's actually enforcing the policy to be a part of how that's done.
Now, what we don't have here is scripted language, and Patty and I are both really, really big fans of scripted language. And that is where you've got your policy, and it tells you what you're supposed to do. The procedure tells you how to do it. The scripted language tells you what to say. Everyone answers the phone the same way. Everybody should say, I'm sorry, you won't be able to check out today because you have these items still on your account and they are overdue. You need to return these items before you'll be allowed to check out. Every single person is going to be so thankful for scripted language in this area. I'm distracted. I can't look. It's cute. It's going to be thankful for scripted language because none of us are at our best when we're on the spot. I've trained on these a long time, but one of Patty's favorite things is to instantly become that patron and go there that quick. And I have to rely on scripted language to help me bring the situation down, de-escalate it, and help me be calm.
A few companies that are really good at scripted language are Southwest Airlines. If you appear intoxicated on a plane or getting on a plane, the words from the gate crew to the person picking up your bags are going to say, I'm sorry, you won't be flying with us today. And they'll get the same answer. Disney is great at scripted language. Zappos. And if you've ever been to Chick-fil-A, instead of saying thank you, they say it's our pleasure. So find a model that you like. And if you need resources, I've got lots because this is one of my passion projects. Okay. Ready, Gail? Here we go. Now this is the hard one. A law enforcement officer approaches the circulation desk and tells you that he is looking for a missing child. He asked to look at the computer sign-in log to see if the child has been in the library today. Now I expect our chat to fly very excitingly, because this one is always this one's a trigger one for a lot of folks. So
Right?
feel
And
free
it's
to add your
there
thoughts
are
in the chat.
multiple things here that we're looking at in this question. Yeah, is he on duty and is he looking for his own child? I've never gone that route before.
See, that one's new.
Yeah, that's a new one. Okay, you've got to have a policy for this. This is, and you've got to know what your state laws say as well. I'm not familiar with the laws in your state, and unfortunately, library laws across states are changing so rapidly that it's difficult, but you need to keep up on this within your own state. Legally, how much information do you give away? How much are you required to give away? Why are you still keeping a computer sign-in log? And why are people signing it? And it should be, hopefully if you are still keeping one, it's behind the desk. But I would say the answer to this one is, I'm sorry, that's not something I'm going to be able to help you with. At the same time, I would say, can you give me more information? Because I feel compelled, and this is my personal ethics, compelled to be helpful if there is a child that is missing and possibly in danger. I'm not going to tell that officer, yes, this child is sitting over there, because I don't know why the officer is looking for the missing child. Are they truant? Is this a case of kidnapping? There are a lot of possible scenarios here. If I know that the child isn't in the library and I'm seated on the news that this child has been kidnapped and is in great danger, what I might say to this officer is, I'm not able to give you that information, but if you'd like, I can walk through the building and the back spaces with you so you can look for yourself. That doesn't give away privacy information for any age patron, but it also works with my helping need, right? If he wants to look at the computer sign-in log, that actually is a different thing. That is perhaps an official document in your library. And in order for you to show that to that officer, you may require a subpoena specifically to that. He can't look at anything. He can't look at patron, and I'm talking Kansas specifically. I would hope it's similar in your state as well. He can't ask to look at patron records to see if they've been in the library today. Now, I have had one instance where the Kansas Bureau of Investigation contacted me on another county, but the librarian had already called and said, hey, the KBI was in and they're going to call and talk to you. In our system, we own the integrated library system, and so all questions from the law come to us. That brings our librarians a great deal of comfort, but we still have trained them on how to do this. So the librarian told me this guy's going to call, and here's what I know about the situation. This was someone who is in grave danger. They had gone missing 3 weeks now. KBI was trying to find them. What I was able to tell the officer when they called was not patron information, but I was able to tell the officer it would not be worth your while to get a subpoena for this information. That way I knew that I wasn't wasting important time finding this person for them to go through the process of getting a subpoena and then giving it to me and me examining it and calling my legal to make sure it's in order. There was no information on that person, even should I be compelled under a subpoena to give it away. So that is another way that I have found that I'm able to work within my own personal ethics, follow the law, and keep our professional ethics, the ethics of our profession, because it doesn't matter if you have a degree or if you don't have a degree. If you work at a library, the public considers you a librarian. We do the same. And if you are a librarian, you are a professional, and you are in a profession that does have clearly defined ethics. Sometimes, as we jumped right off the bat here with this one, our personal ethics may collide with our professional ethics. Boom, exactly. And it will be up to you to figure out where you can fit. If there are certain things that you absolutely cannot compromise within your own personal ethics, it may be time to ask yourself, am I in the right profession?
When we get to that, the question about the computer sign-in log, um, if it's always been rather nonchalant in your library, now's the time to look at what information are we giving away.
What information are we just leaving up on the counter for anyone to look at? Because we've walked into libraries where, you know, everything but their driver's license and social security are asked.
And we want to make sure that we're not collecting information that we don't need as library professionals, but also information that the public could come in and see. I walked into a library several years ago, and the summer library charts were all in a box, and it had the child's name, age, address, telephone number, all right there. And anybody could have walked in and found all this information about Johnny Smith. And so that's one of those questions. So Gail, would you feel differently if this person was the parent rather than the law enforcement officer?
No, I'm not intimidated by anybody with a sidearm strapped to their belt. I have learned to know what my rights are and what I have to give away and what I don't have to give away. Law enforcement can feel intimidating, and sometimes they are downright, but especially in this instance, they're looking for you to help them solve a problem. The law officer should know what you can and can't give away. And if you just say, this is not information I can share with you, that usually tends to it, especially if you say, I can't do that, but let me tell you what I can do. I can walk you through the building. Or we don't keep those logs, but hold on just a minute. I can tell you it would not be worth your time to subpoena for that information. And that is me helping still, but staying within the strong parameters. Tina posted an awesome law enforcement policy. It is really good. It talks about how we support the efforts of our law organizations, but we do have to still adhere to our laws. And they've designated who is the person that will respond to them. I think that's very important to know who the librarian in charge is, because if it's just your high school part-time clerk, you know what you know, Murphy's Law, it's going to happen when they're there. Do they know how to respond? Because I'm 64, I know how to respond. When I was 16, I probably wouldn't have known how to respond, and I was a well-trained clerk then. But it's a really good policy, really good. I saved it for us to use for an example.
So since we're talking about the law, one of the biggest challenges that we find in library are what are the legal reasons that you can ask someone to leave the library.
Yeah.
There are 3 reasons: preventing other patrons from using or enjoying the library, preventing staff from being able to do their jobs, and the one that we all know the answer to, vandalism and or property damage.
You are not allowed to start fires in the ladies' bathroom.
Oops, sorry.
I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Are you going back?
I am.
There we go.
Just had to. I accidentally clicked. You know how that happens.
I do. I'm always trigger happy when I'm presenting. These are 3 reasons that have stood up all the way to the Supreme Court. And I think it's important that all library workers know these 3 reasons, because you'll notice they're pretty specific. Preventing others from enjoying or using the library is that creepy patron who always stares at my chest and I'm another patron. Or, this could also be that parent at the computer who has 2 little ones and the little ones are screaming and hollering, and I'm trying to use the computer next to them to finish a test or to file any kind of claim. Oh, well, here's a good one. Bobby says,
Wow.
we had to ban 3 patrons from our property for committing sexual crimes at the library. What category would that fall under? Well, Patty has one where it would be number 2, where she had to say, sir, I need you to pull up your pants or you'll be leaving today. So that would be a number 2. It kind of depends on what the sexual crime was. If it was open and it was 2 people going at it in a restroom, it would prevent a patron from using that restroom. If they were messy, it could be vandalism and or property damage. Generally, these 3 things this is the patron that smells. This is the grandma with really strong perfume. This is the after-school kid that follows you around asking for something constantly to do while they wait the 2 hours until their parent comes in. But also it could be the grandma who comes in and wants to show you 400 vacation photos or photos of their new grandchild. Those 2 are really big. Vandalism and property damage is pretty obvious to most of us. And so without asking you to share what the sexual crimes were, do you think then, Bobby, that it might fall under 1, 2, or 3? And while we're waiting for Bobby to respond, we can go ahead.
So, you'll notice the word says ban, which means leaving for an extended period of time, rather than being asked to leave for a day, because that middle schooler who's been sitting all day long just can't handle being in the library. That's being asked to leave for the day with the idea that they can come back. But being banned means gone for more than a day.
Okay, Bobby says, so 2 of them were very much 1 and 2. And the 3rd one, they used library Wi-Fi to download illegal images. And so that's a little bit different because you've got specific laws about downloading illegal images, whether they use the Wi-Fi or one of your work computers as well. Those are likely state laws or local ordinances as well. But still, you can't do what's against the law. Excellent sharing, Bobby. Thank you. And that's my mother's name, so how sweet.
And remember that you need a process for a patron who has been banned to be allowed to come back in.
An appeal process.
Go ahead, Gail.
An appeal process. And so when we write a letter to a patron that says that you've been banned, here's for the time frame and here's for the reason, and we usually only put 1, 2, or 3, one of these 3 reasons here. There might be another reason, and that is banning for health reasons, but that would be that's a separate story, because really that comes under property damage in the instance I'm thinking. So you had a patron with bed bugs or returning materials that were creepy and crawly with bed bugs. But when we send the letter, and in the policy, it talks about the appeals process. If a patron wants to appeal that ban, what's their step? It's step by step, what they have to do, how long they have to do it, and who they need to talk to. We don't say the specific name, like we wouldn't say Gail, Santy, we would say the director of the Central Kansas Library System. Because in order to make it legal, you have to have that appeals process. And so in the case of banning a teenager or a child, we look at that very differently because kids may need to use the library for school projects. So in our ban, it would include something like how long, definitely. It would have to be pretty dire for it to be more than a month, in my opinion. But also then that if your child needs to use the library, they must be accompanied by a parent or caregiver over the age of 18. And the parent must stay within arm's reach at all times, something like that. You have to allow that opportunity for they have different life circumstances than an adult.
Thank you, Gail. Now we're going to move on to some topics that are going to hit home. A previous librarian kept books such as What's Happening to My Body and It's Perfectly Normal behind the desk. What do you do?
Okay, type your answers in the chat or unmute yourself. If you'd like to share, we'd be glad to hear from you. Well, a lot of libraries, instead of putting them behind the desk, may catalog them and put them in the adult nonfiction collection. You need to be this is tricky because the answer now is not the same answer 3 years ago. And that is tricky because some of my colleagues were just talking about, there's going to come a time in the next few years where all we can read is the old stuff. But you have to know your community. You have to, without assuming, you have to really understand the moral compass of your community. And you have to work within those parameters. You also have to understand what our profession says. So Gary says, these books should be available for checkout in the main part of the library. Yes. And Bobby says it depends why. A previous director kept the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues behind the desk because they kept getting stolen. Exactly. So we've got a couple of things here, and 3 separate reasons. She would probably put them where they were age appropriate, and that's what I would do as a librarian. My board might determine otherwise, and I would have to work with that. And in some states now, these books have to move to the adult collection. And in some states now, children aren't allowed within 100 feet of the adult collection. And so children can't come into these tiny libraries, and the librarian is having to bring materials out to them. So the answer to this has very much changed. And it's very much situational based on where you are geographically. How about you, Patty? I see you're climbing on your soapbox.
I am. I'm trying not to go there.
Go there.
30-year children's librarian. So now you know where I'm coming from. But yes, it's been very difficult for me personally to read the news that is happening in other states and knowing that in many places now, individual librarians are told these items are no longer being purchased, and if they're there, they're weeded. They're not available for borrowing from the library. And so it's that, you get back to that from the personal side of Patty is where are some of these children going to find this information?
Mhm.
And then I go back to my I have to follow what my board says I have to do. And so you fight those internal struggles a lot, but
I think that for a board to make a decision, they have to be well educated. We're trustee trainers, and a board has to be well educated. Otherwise, they're not going to make good decisions. They can't just come in with their own personal bias. They need to understand what the appropriate library response is, and they need to understand what the laws are. And then if this is even a decision that should ever come to a board, that way then they can say, no, these are materials that belong in our library and children need to have access in them. One of the things that I'd recommend also is that if it ever comes to you where you can't have these physical books in the library, make sure that your digital resources or your digital library has these titles in. And yes, library records are confidential unless it's an emergency. And that's where I'd say it depends on what state you're in. A missing child would be an emergency to me, especially in the case of a minor, right? And that's why I've learned to work around with that as well, because I agree.
Gail and I learned sitting in at a Kansas library law session after we had been practicing here for some time, and learned how the definition of the law gets really
Right.
and so what happened, we were both, as I was standing on my soapbox, and she knew that's where I was going, but I believed that I had the patron's confidentiality, regardless of their age, completely secured in my personal ethics. And then I learned that there's a point where, by Kansas law, that there's a point where I give away the farm because I have to tell the parents. And so, and I had been practicing for 20 years at this time and had never learned that information. So we chose this question because we do know that it's politically and emotionally charged. And so we're going to get into
But we firmly believe, I was also a children's librarian, we firmly believe that children have informational needs as well.
and so that's what this slide is about, is that equal and neutral manner, because if a child asks me for it, I feel like I should be able to provide it.
Right. And in Kansas, we still can.
Thankfully.
So
So
ethical dilemmas, I talked about it a little bit, but that's when your personal and your professional values come into conflict. And just on the few scenarios we've already talked about, you can see where that might be the case with you. But if you're uncomfortable, you need to figure out where you can go and how you, if your personal values are different than the library values, how can you work within that? And that's where it can be tricky. And this is where really open, honest, non-judgmental conversation can come into play. Somebody on staff should be able to say, I'm not really comfortable with this. Somebody else may have already worked through that dilemma, and here's how they deal with it. I provide the information. I don't ask questions about it. Does your mom know you're getting this? Those kinds of things. This is the meat of the discussion, because what do you do? And then at the end of the day, how can you still go home and look yourself in the mirror? And we live in the Midwest. It's fairly conservative, but our library profession says we should be able to do this.
I follow a lot of Facebook groups on library management, all the way from the tiny library think tank to library programming. And I find that there's a lot of disillusionment right now where people are leaving the profession. And some, when they've hit these type of situations, they have moved to non-public facing jobs, because these situations oftentimes hit the public facing jobs the hardest. And so they've moved to technical services or other situations where it is not a daily struggle to handle that type of situation.
Right.
Bobby says one of our interview questions is, what would you do if a patron checked out an item that you do not like or have negative feelings about? For children's staff, I tailor to this situation.
Yeah, very good.
Very good question. Okay, everybody breathe for a second. You see, there's two kitty cats if you look really
I see a
closely.
little vampire cat.
Vampire cat. Okay.
This is kind of an easy one. And so Judy and Julie are good friends, and they live in a small town. There's less than 200 people there, and they share similar reading tastes. Julie comes in and wants to know what Judy has recently checked out so she can read those books too. What would you do? Patty? You're at bat.
Um, well, this is that good opportunity to encourage them to call their friend, because they can give that information to you. And it's a simple answer that we know that you share similar reading tastes, and we acknowledge that. However, this isn't information I can give to you. Now, I'm going to take it a step further. If she happens to have Judy's library card because she checks up things for her, she has Judy's official library card,
And
then
permission.
I
to
have
read
the ability to share that information by what our local library policies say about use of that library card. So if she's carrying Judy's card, and this might be one of the options that we give to them because they come and ask this question so often, that split library card, give it to the other one so they can keep up with each other. But the first
If
thing I would
you're,
say is call your friend.
If your integrated library system allows patrons to make lists, this would be an awesome place for Judy and Julie and all their good friends who read the same books to make a list. And then Judy and Julia, can check on one another, and that way they know. People of a certain age still write down the titles that they receive. They can certainly share that privately, and that's not something we're part and parcel with.
And we also know that some people have their own codes that they write in their library books in pencil on certain pages or in the back flap. You know, if they share that with each other, that's, you know, I'm not going to take the time to go erase all of those little X's and initials and whatever. Your taxpayers deserve more than you taking time to take care of all those. And Bobby affirmed our answer, so I feel like we can move on. This is my favorite training question. I've done a lot of circulation desk training. A mother receives an overdue notice and contacts the library to find out all the materials checked out on her 15-year-old son's library account. Now, we gave a hint a little bit ago that when these materials go to the point, at least in the state of Kansas, when these materials go to the point where they are receiving no longer fines, but they're receiving letters from the library saying they need to be replaced, then in Kansas, we know that our personal ethics now get a big hit, and we have to give that information away.
However, if the mother is calling on the phone, what do you say?
I can't actually identify who you are. So if you have your son's library card with me and can read the numbers for me, I'd be happy to look up that information for you.
Have you asked your son what the materials are? That's another question we could say. This is more likely to come into account in a shared custody situation where the dad brings the kids to the library, the kids check out on the card that the mother is the guarantor for. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of situations. We've gotten some good information. Sorry, we don't give out this information as it is confidential. We do if someone is regularly picking up for a patron who cannot physically come to the library, Gary says, and part of that we put an actual note on that patron's record that Sue Smith may pick up materials for them. Emily Stone, thank you for chiming in. Our policy states a parent or legal guardian may be told how many items are checked out on a juvenile card, the item barcodes, but titles will not be revealed. Very clever. Very clever. And there are good reasons for that. But that is giving out information. You know, by giving them the barcode, they know what to look for, and then they're going to know how many items there are. This question actually has much broader implications. What do you say when you call and tell someone the hold that they placed has arrived at the library?
I simply say you have a hold. You have
And
4
then
books on
what
hold
do
and they're
you say
available
if
for
you
you.
have to leave a message? We have worked with libraries on this numerous different times. The title should not be mentioned. And one of the examples that I always give for that is in the case of a contentious marriage situation, the wife is looking for how to get a divorce, or, what do I do when someone is abusing me? And if you leave that title there, then the wife's life is endangered. We talk about kids who are borrowing materials on teen pregnancy. We don't know why, and nor should we assume that that child is pregnant or is not. They may be writing a report. Their own parents may have different personal ethics than a friend, and the friend would not be allowed to borrow this, so they're borrowing it for a friend. There are so many different possibilities with a scenario like this, and we can never make assumptions about why a patron is borrowing something.
And so, Gail went one direction, but the other thing is it may be the child's reading Harry Potter, and that's been put on the no listed home, or they're reading a graphic novel. And it could be a graphic novel about the ancient Greece. It's not a graphic novel that might contain nudity or whatever, but it may be the fact that graphic novels or comic books are not allowed at home. And so it's that there's a whole lot of reasons, and and I'm just as guilty as I'm sure all of you, at least at one time. I'm sorry, the computer's not giving me that information at this time. Sometimes you have to follow that, because you don't know what else to say. And
Now,
sometimes you're being pelted with the questions.
when I was working upstairs in the library, the workaround for my personal ethics and professional ethics with this question was I would not give them the titles. By law, I'm required to. So I would take them over to another computer, and I would log in and I would let them, after they had shown me that child's library card or gave me the number, I then would turn the screen so that they could see it for themselves. I met the spirit of the law, and I also followed my own professional ethics. It's a sad state we live in these days now, but so be it.
It is. And so there's one more question about children coming for you.
Oh, yeah. And this is the which one are we doing? This one or the one before it?
We're on the library board question.
Okay.
Okay, this actually came to us. We've modified it slightly, but it came to us during COVID.
Well, and I will tell you that all of these scenarios, we don't make it up. These are real life scenarios we've heard.
We had a library board make a decision during COVID to not allow any child under the age of 15 in the library for an undetermined period of time. And
The youngest member on their board was 70 if they were a day.
and they kept this policy in place through from the time Kansas closed schools, which was middle of March, through summer library. So it was a good 5 months or longer that they did not provide in library service, even though the library had reopened. And so we've also encountered this situation where it's the taxpayer who says kids are just sitting on computers doing nothing, so kids don't get computer time, only adults do because they're doing real work. But the kid might actually be doing schoolwork, and the adults just playing on Facebook, since we hear that a lot.
Right.
So this situation can be applied to several different situations. Emily writes, by that logic, shouldn't we not have public schools? So public libraries are for everyone. And
Board members are not infallible. Again, a board can only make decisions based on the information they receive. In this instance, it would be the library director's responsibility to come and tell them in a way that's not going to get you fired, why this is a bad decision. Now, Patty, if one of our staff members comes to me with a problem, what do I also require them to bring? So the director's not only gonna say, this is a bad idea,
But it's also going to provide a solution. Come up with at least one solution, but ideally 3 or 4, because when I bring something to Gail, I need to make certain that I'm going to get what I want. I mean, that's what you're doing. And the same way happens with your library board. We've trained hundreds and hundreds of trustees over the last 10 years together, and they're not unreasonable, but again, they may be coming totally from their personal ethics.
and their
And
own
as
personal perspective,
and
which
as a board member, that corporate body is who makes the decisions, not Jane Smith, who's the newly appointed board member.
and the most outspoken.
Haha, yes. And so the getting the board to work as a corporate body, that board can still have a dissenting opinion. That board member can have that dissenting opinion. However, when they step outside of that meeting, they are a united front. And we hope that they're a united front with their library director and their library staff,
Yes.
because Gail has this description that Kansas law actually does define what library boards in Kansas do, and reminds them that they are the most respected volunteers in the state of Kansas, because there are laws that govern what they do. Well, when you think in those terms, a library board member goes from being here to being all puffed up and go, okay, I am important. And what you say and how you behave in those board meetings are important, but the decisions that come out of them are the opportunities that we provide to our community. And when we don't look at it in that way, it's really hard to not let our personal perspective get in the way.
Yeah. Gary says if the library is open, it should be open to everyone. This would be an issue that I might be willing to resign over. Yes, and that is beyond the pale for your professional ethics, and also backed up by your personal ethics as well. Yep.
And in this situation, now I want you to go to your gut and change the word youth to some other person or identifiable characteristic that might get you to change your perspective. It could be a person who has a different lifestyle than you might have,
Intelligent.
different religion, or frankly,
Educational
different
background.
political party. And one of the things that we often work with our librarians and say is, we know that standing on the inside of that desk gives you the idea that you know your community. And you do know Mrs. Jones and you know Mrs. Smith, but you know them in terms of the library. And you know Johnny, who's the 14-year-old who rides his skateboard right through the door every day. And you're like, yep, I know him. But what we don't know is what happens when that person leaves the building. We don't know what they believe. We don't know how they vote or how they pray or who they love or how they love. And when we think of those things, and in this situation, taking that word youth away and dropping in any one of those other peoples or groups, then I find Gary's comment resonating very much to me.
With me too. Yeah.
Because the library is for everyone and is open for everyone.
What's next?
A little smile, because you need one. We have a couple comments in the chat. Will you read those for me, Gail?
Yes, my tenant is the library is for everyone. Everyone is welcome, even if you don't have a library card. Yes, I agree. And you can use the computers without a library card too. But that might not be what your board feels. What's next?
Someone, I got a private comment. Someone asked me, are you using lifestyle to relay folks in the LGBTQ community? If so, can I suggest that you identify differently than you? Excellent. Thank you for the comment. I appreciate that. Um, it's that difficulty when it is not yourself, and you have to learn all of these things. And so this has been a challenging time for all of us. And so thank you. I really appreciate your comment. I will learn to use those words.
And share with her colleagues as well.
So we do give you a host of resources. Those all at the top are available through the American Library Association. It is their ethics statement, values of librarianship, and the Bill of Rights. And then the ethics statement for trustees is here as well.
And for us, many library boards have opted to make the ethics statement for trustees part of their recruitment package or part of their initial training. And yes, then they have had people say, oh, then this isn't for me. And that wasn't a bad thing.
The West Virginia Public Library Directors Boot Camp, it is a slideshow that has some similar type of questions in a slightly different manner. Copyright and fair use regarding to mostly to photocopying, because that seems to be one of the biggest challenges that we have. Slides from an intellectual freedom presentation, because of course a lot of our ethical questions are intellectual freedom related. And then the YouTube link from the time that we did this before. So you do have another video to watch, and that will contain our former colleague, Mary Beth Schaefer, as well.
Different scenarios.
Um,
our LibGuides was on there as well. Those are resource guides. If you, for me, one of the best parts about it is there's a huge database there with all different kinds of sample policies. They're shared on a Google Drive, so you don't even need to ask for sharing. You can just download it right from there. They're in Word format. And so it can save you a lot of time preparing policies. The CE one has my best side, Patty, has all kinds of different training videos of all different sorts of links on our YouTube channel.
Feel free to use that that channel and those pages. We pass it around a lot, because that is information that we are happy to give away for free. We want you to feel manned with the resources that you need, because that last slide truly says you are not alone.
It is not easy.
Your situation is not unique. We all have the challenges. It's just trying to find a way to reconcile some of the decisions that we have to make in the course of a day.
Yep. And it's not easy to be a librarian right now. And we want to publicly acknowledge that with all of you, and congratulate you for staying with the sinking ship, or what feels like a sinking ship. But if you're at a point where you think, I just can't do this work anymore, reach out to someone, even call Patty or I. We regularly have librarians crying on the phone to us. It's not because we're bullies or meanies. It's because we can be raw and honest, and they can as well with us. Librarians have faced hard times in the past. If you look at the ALA Library Bill of Rights, and you notice when all the revisions were done, think about what was going on in the world when the very first Bill of Rights happened. There were book burnings going on in Nazi Germany. And I actually have stood on the exact spot where books were burned. If you look, there were things that happened in the 60s where every person then is allowed to use the library and to receive the information they want. It was right in the civil rights movement. Then you can see when children suddenly had rights. These were really tough times, and we weathered those as a profession. And I believe that if we stick together and we really support one another and be open and honest, and if necessary, raw with each other, that gives us a strength to weather the situations we're seeing right now. You are wonderful people. I wish I could have seen more faces. That's always great as a presenter, but I understand that. You are wonderful and your community needs you. And while you may have an outspoken person in your community who's all no, 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 this or that, I would bet that if you did a customer service survey, the library would have really, really high marks. And that is not because of what you've got in there to check out. A library is not just a collection of stuff. If it's just stuff, it just sits there and they don't need anybody to handle it. People come to the library because of you and they return because of you, because you've made them feel special. And on your hardest day, remember that. If you don't already, start keeping track of those little love notes you get or those little great comments you get and put them in a drawer. And sometimes you need to sit there and you need to read 3 or 4 of them. That frequently will rejuvenate your spirit and get you ready to go back into the ring to fight the next fight. You are valued and you are wonderful. And thank you for spending your time with us. And please feel free to share this with your frontline staff as well.
Thank you so much, Patty and Gail. And yes, everyone, this has been recorded and Patty and Gail give us permission to share the slideshow as well. So you will get this information to share with your staffs. So thank you.
There are
again.
additional scenarios on the end of the slideshow. There's, I think, 6 more that we give to you for you to have a chance to practice with your staff. This is a good staff meeting activity, and you have to declare a few ground rules. You know, if you have some contention among your staff, you know, you have to allow everybody's voice to be heard. We call that step up, step back. Gail and I tend to be the loudest people in the room. And that's why we have to intentionally make ourselves pause and allow for others to speak. But we want you to, I mirror what Gail says. We are so jealous of those working in frontline work. We also are there for those working in frontline work. So I put our telephone number and our email addresses in the chat for you, and it will be available on the slideshow as well. But if it's 6 months down the road and you hit one of those and you don't feel comfortable contacting IHLS, feel free. Just tell us where we saw you, whether it was at ARSL or at an online presentation. And we're happy to be that, hey, library lady, that you need to ask a question to, or to sometimes just know that there's a shoulder to cry on, or a virtual hug coming your way, because you do the hard work. And we
As I always say, we are paid by Kansas taxpayers, but we give it away for free.
Well, thank you again. See, I told everybody at the beginning that you are both fantastic, and now everyone knows that as well. So thank you again so much for joining us. And I look forward to hopefully crossing your paths again soon. This has been great and a lot of things to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Y'all have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for your kind comments. And thank you for joining us.
Okay, everyone, it's a little bit after 11. I'm gonna let Matt stop the recording for a moment, and then we're going to take a moment.